Fly it if you dare." The words weren't a challenge, they were a weapon. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel, echoing across the hangar as cameras pointed toward a woman in torn shoes and a ragged jacket. She stood frozen, not from fear, but from the weight of humiliation. To them, she was nothing. To him, she was entertainment. But what none of them knew was that this so-called beggar carried the skies in her blood. And before the day ended, she would rise higher than the man who mocked her. This is the story of a legend reborn. Comment your city below. She had once been known for the way she carried herself in the skies, but on the ground, no one saw that now. To the world around her, she was just another homeless woman, barefoot on cracked pavement, clutching a torn jacket against the wind. Her name was Amara Johnson, and in another lifetime, she had worn a pilot's uniform, her voice steady over radio signals, her hands guiding massive aircraft through storms. But here, at the edge of a busy airport terminal, she was invisible. Travelers hurried past her with rolling suitcases, eyes averted, as if acknowledging her existence might slow them down. Her days had a rhythm, though none she had ever imagined for herself. Morning meant finding shelter under concrete awnings. Afternoon meant searching for scraps of food. And night meant curling up on cardboard near the chain-link fences where she could still hear the faint roar of planes overhead. That sound pierced her heart every time, reminding her of what she had lost, but also keeping alive the whisper of who she once had been. Amara's decline wasn't the result of laziness or weakness. It was the collision of life's cruelties and racial prejudice stacked against her. Years ago, after serving as one of the few black women in aviation, she had faced constant dismissal, subtle mockery, and the unspoken belief that she didn't belong in the cockpit. When her father passed, leaving behind debts she had no way of paying, and when systemic barriers shut doors in her face, the spiral began. She lost her home, her career, and the respect of those who once applauded her. Yet, even in rags, there was a quiet dignity in the way she stood, chin lifted, as though daring the world to strip away the last pieces of her spirit. The streets were cruel, but airports were crueler. They reminded her of the life she had been denied. Still, she couldn't stay away. She often lingered outside the gates, watching takeoffs with eyes that burned with memory. For others, planes were machines. For her, they were freedom. And it was here, standing on the fringes of luxury she no longer had access to, that her path would collide with arrogance dressed in wealth. The millionaire arrived that afternoon, his limousine door opening onto the private hangar. He wore success like armor, every gesture meant to remind others of what they lacked. He noticed Amara not with kindness, but with ridicule. To him, she was not a woman with a story, but a spectacle to be mocked. She didn't know it yet, but his cruelty would ignite the very fire she thought had burned out. In a matter of moments, the world would stop seeing her as a shadow on the sidewalk and begin to remember her as something far greater. The stage was set, and the skies, her skies, waited. The hangar was alive with activity, mechanics checking instruments, flight crews hurrying to prepare for the next departure, private jets gleaming under the sunlight. It was a world of power and privilege, where wealth dictated who was welcome and who was not. Amara stood just beyond the restricted line, her thin frame wrapped in that same torn jacket, as if clinging to the last barrier between her past and her present. The millionaire spotted her instantly. To him, she was not simply a woman standing nearby. She was a disruption, a blemish on the polished surface of his afternoon. His laughter echoed across the tarmac as he gestured toward her. A few of his companions turned their heads, their eyes narrowing, and soon they were all whispering. "Look at her," one muttered, as though she were some kind of attraction. Another smirked, shaking his head. But it was the millionaire who carried the cruelest words. His voice was sharp, laced with arrogance. He mocked her clothes, her worn shoes, the way her shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world had settled there. Each insult struck like a blade, but Amara did not bow. Her silence was her armor, her gaze steady. She had endured worse. Prejudice in boardrooms, condescension in training academies, discrimination in every corner of the industry she had once loved. She knew the sting of racism dressed as jokes, the way people questioned her intelligence, her right to belong in the cockpit, her very presence in a world dominated by others who didn't look like her. But today, the sting was public, raw, amplified by the laughter of those who stood behind the millionaire. His words weren't casual, they were a spectacle. He wanted everyone to see that he was powerful enough to humiliate her, powerful enough to strip her of dignity she still carried like a fragile flame. Then came the moment that would change everything. With a smirk, he gestured to the private jet standing proudly at the end of the runway. "If you're really worth anything," he sneered, his voice carrying over the sound of engines, "I'll give you the plane if you can fly it." The crowd burst into laughter. Some clapped, others pulled out phones to record. It was entertainment for them. A cruel game played at the expense of someone who couldn't possibly fight back. Or so they thought. Amara's heart pounded. For a second, the weight of it all pressed against her ribs. The humiliation, the disbelief, the memory of 1,000 doors slammed in her face. But beneath that pressure, something else began to stir. She remembered the feel of the cockpit controls beneath her fingers, the hum of engines at her command, the quiet respect that once filled the cabin when her voice came over the radio. She didn't answer him. She didn't need to. She simply stepped forward, her bare feet brushing the smooth concrete, every movement a defiance. The laughter faltered just slightly. The millionaire's grin widened, convinced she was walking into his trap. To him, this was the punchline, watching a homeless woman approach a multi-million-dollar jet as if she belonged there. His friends leaned forward, eager for the embarrassment that was sure to follow. But Amara wasn't walking into shame. She was walking toward redemption. With every step, flashes of her past collided with the present. She remembered her first solo flight, the thrill of breaking through cloud cover into endless blue. She remembered the obstacles, the sneers of instructors who doubted her, the passengers who looked twice when they saw who was in command. And she remembered conquering all of it. Now she reached the aircraft, its metallic body gleaming like a mirror reflecting her truth back at her. The crowd hushed, curiosity replacing their laughter. Could she really? No. Impossible. That was the thought flickering through their minds. Amara placed her hand against the door, her touch firm, deliberate. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. And then she began to climb. The tension was electric. Inside the hangar, whispers spread like wildfire. Some murmured that she would be dragged out by security. Others insisted she would freeze under pressure, exposed as nothing more than a fraud. The millionaire watched with folded arms, smug certainty painted across his face. He was convinced this was her downfall, her final humiliation. But Amara's silence was louder than his laughter. She slid into the cockpit, her fingers trembling not from fear, but from the overwhelming surge of memory. Everything was still there. The layout of controls, the instinctive knowledge carved into her bones from years of flight. Her breath steadied. Her hands found their place. The engines roared to life. The crowd gasped. Phones raised higher, disbelief spreading like fire. This wasn't part of the show they expected. Something was happening, something they couldn't yet comprehend. The millionaire's smirk faltered. For the first time that day, his confidence cracked, and Amara, once invisible, once mocked, was seconds away from rewriting the script of her life. The engines thundered, a sound that ripped through the hangar like a storm. What had begun as mockery was now a spectacle no one could turn away from. The crowd pressed closer, their laughter replaced with silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. A homeless woman, one they had dismissed as nothing, was sitting in the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar jet. Inside, Amara's hands moved with a certainty she thought she had lost. The switches, the levers, the dials, each one obeyed her command as though the machine had been waiting for her return. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. Years of humiliation, rejection, and erasure were balanced against this single act. If she succeeded, she would shatter every cruel word. If she failed, she would be remembered only as a spectacle, the punchline of a wealthy man's joke. The millionaire's voice cut through the roar. He barked at the staff to stop her, to pull her out, to remind her where she belonged. But they hesitated. Something in the way Amara carried herself froze them in place. This wasn't desperation, it was mastery. She didn't look like a thief sneaking into a plane. She looked like she owned it. And then the impossible happened. The jet's wheels began to roll, slowly at first, then with force. Gasps erupted as the ground shook beneath the power of engines under her control. The cameras captured everything. The ragged jacket, the determined eyes, the sight of someone the world had thrown away commanding the sky again. The millionaire's arrogance crumbled. His laughter died in his throat as reality hit. This was no stunt, no accident. He had handed the spotlight to the very woman he tried to bury under shame, and she was about to rise higher than ever before. Amara gritted her teeth, heart pounding as the runway stretched before her. Each second was a battle against the years she had been silenced, overlooked, erased. The jet gained speed, wheels rattling against the earth, the crowd's disbelief rising to a fever pitch, and then lift. The plane broke free of the ground. Soaring upward, slicing through the air like destiny itself had returned to claim her. For Amara, it wasn't just flight, it was vindication. Every insult, every moment of poverty, every racist dismissal burned away in the fire of her ascent. She wasn't just proving herself. She was reminding the world of who she had always been. The millionaire shielded his eyes against the glare, but he couldn't hide from the truth. His attempt to humiliate her had become the moment that defined her greatness. And as the jet climbed higher, the only question left hanging in the air was this: what would happen when she came back down? Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. As the jet cut across the sky, the world below could no longer deny what they were witnessing. This was not the flight of chance or desperation. It was the return of someone history had tried to erase. Amara Johnson, once dismissed as a shadow on the streets, had risen again in the very skies that had always belonged to her. When the plane touched back down, the silence was deafening. The same crowd that had laughed at her now stood frozen, their disbelief etched on every face. The millionaire, red with shame, tried to mask his humiliation, but there was no escaping the truth. His mockery had become his undoing. The very stage he created for her downfall had turned into her triumph. Amara stepped down from the cockpit with her head held high. She didn't need applause. She didn't need recognition. Her victory wasn't in proving the millionaire wrong. It was in reclaiming the dignity and identity that racism had tried to strip from her. In that moment, she was no longer the woman society ignored. She was what she had always been, an aviation legend. But beyond the hangar, her story carried a deeper weight. Because Amara's struggle wasn't hers alone. It was the struggle of countless others silenced, underestimated, and dismissed simply because of the color of their skin. Racism doesn't always show itself in overt acts of violence. Sometimes it hides in laughter and jokes, in the quiet erasure of talent and worth. Her humiliation was public, but how many private humiliations go unseen every day? Her rise was not just about proving a point. It was a reminder that brilliance, resilience, and dignity exist even in those society tries to bury under poverty or prejudice. And it was also a warning, because every act of mockery, every systemic barrier, every cruel dismissal carries consequences. Eventually, truth breaks through, and the very voices silenced the longest often rise the loudest. For those who watched her flight that day, the lesson was undeniable. Never underestimate the power of someone you choose to look down on. The world is full of forgotten legends, waiting for a chance to be seen again. And so the question remains, not just for Amara, but for all of us. How many more lives will be broken by prejudice before the world decides to change? Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories, and share this video if you believe it's time for voices like Amara's to be heard.